These two symbols right here have caused so many students so much stress over the years. In fact, one of the most common questions I get about a piece is, which one is which again, and what note do we start on, and how many do we do, and where do we end up? So in this video, I'm going to completely clear that up for you. So by the end of the video, you'll be able to see one of these symbols in your piece and know exactly what you're supposed to do. Let's start off here with the trill, which is often notated just TR or a squiggly line. Quick fun fact for you, back in the day, this used to be called a shake. I mean, that's a pretty cool term, right? A shake. Now there are two steps to figuring out what notes you're supposed to play every time you see a TR. So you might be tempted after I get finished explaining step one to kind of click off and say, cool, that's all you need to know. But the second step is really, really important too. So make sure you kind of stick around for both steps. The first step is just figuring out which two notes you're supposed to trill on. As you probably already know, most trills sound something like this or this. So knowing which two notes you're supposed to trill on is the first step. So let's say you have a trill on the note G. You see the note G written in your page, then a TR written above it. Well, the note you see written on the page is G, and that's actually one of the two notes of the trill. That G is going to be what we call the printed or the principal note. That the main note of that trill is a G. Then you're also going to trill on the note one letter name above that note. So in this case, we see G written on the page, so we're going to have G as part of the trill. But we're also going to trill on the note above G, which in this case is going to be A. So G and A are the two notes of the trill. So for another example, let's say you had the trill symbol written above a C. Well, you know the C is going to be part of that trill. Then you're also going to trill on the note above the C, the letter name higher than C, which is going to be D. Now notice that I'm saying a letter name higher, not necessarily the next key on the piano, but a letter name above your printed note. I'll show you why that's important in just a minute here. But first, let's real quick find a real life example of a trill and figuring out which two notes you're supposed to trill on. So we're going to check out Mozart K545, measure 25. You see here in measure 25, we have an A written. That is our printed note. Our principal note is A. So we're going to trill on A and the letter name above A, which is B. Okay, so we're still on step one, figuring out what notes you're supposed to trill on. And so far it's been pretty simple, right? You just play the note you see on the page and then trill on that note and the note above it. But let's talk about a few things that could happen. Like for example, if there is a key signature, you have to follow that key signature when you do your trill. So in the earlier example of trilling on an A, we said we were going to trill on A and B, but if we were in the key signature of two flats, which would be either the key of B flat major or G minor, well, B would actually be flat. So that's why it's important to say trill on the note you see and the letter name above it. And that letter name is going to be whatever letter name it is in the key signature. So in this example, it's A and then B, but B is actually flat from the key signature. So in the example of two flats, if you see a trill on A, you're going to have to basically respect or recognize the fact that B's are all flat. So that trill would be on A and B flat. So for another example, let's say you have a key signature of 1 sharp, and that's of course F sharp. So let's say we're in the key of G, if the key signature of F sharp, all your F's are sharp, you have the note E, and on that E is a trill. Well, you know the E is going to be part of the trill because that's the note you see. You're like, okay, Ryan said to go to the letter name above E. Well, the letter above E is F. Well, all F's are sharp. So your trill is going to be on E and F sharp. So simply put, whenever figuring out the notes that go into a trill, the note above the note you see has to pay attention to the key signature, just like all the other notes had to pay attention to the key signature. Now, what if a composer wants you to trill on a note that isn't in the key signature? Well, that's actually really simple. If it's the principal note, the printed note, they would just adjust it there on the page, right? They would say, hey, don't do E flat, do E natural and trill. That's actually really simple. If you want to change your printed or your principal note, they would just adjust that as you typically would adjust a note. But if they want to adjust the upper note, the note that you're trilling on, the letter name above, they actually put an accidental, a flat, a sharp, or a natural above the TR symbol. So here we have a trill on G, and there are no sharps and no flats in the key signature, so we would just assume that G and the letter name above G is A, so we need a trill on G and A. But if the composer wanted you to trill on G and A flat, they would have to add a flat above the TR, like this. Okay, that is step one. You now know when you see a trill which two notes you're supposed to trill on, but there remains one big question. This is actually the question that seems like it confuses more people than step one. The second thing you need to know before you play a trill now is which of those two notes do you start to trill on and which of those two notes do you end the trill on? Now let's start with which note you end the trill on, because that's actually really simple. You always end the trill on the note you see, so the printed note, that main note, or you can even say the lower of the two notes. So if you have a trill on G, you trill on G and A, where you're going to go back and forth on G and A for a while, and you're going to end on G. If your trill is on the note E, it doesn't matter if it's E and F sharp, whatever it is, you're going to end on E. So the note you end on is always the same, always end on the printed note, that main principal note of the trill. But whether you start on the printed note or the upper note actually depends on which time period the piece was written in. So the rule I want you to learn is that if your piece is written before the year 1800, so before the year 1800, assume that your trills start on the upper of the two notes. So that actually means it doesn't start on your principal note. So if you have a trill and the trill is on D, okay, there's D, you're going to trill on the note D, and the note above D, let's say the letter name above D is E with no sharps and flats, so we're going to actually start on that E. So if you had trill on note A, the letter name above A is B, so we're going to trill on A and B, but if our piece is written before the year 1800, we're actually going to start on that B. So before 1800, that means you'd be playing a thing by Bach or Handel, Mozart, early Beethoven, most of Haydn, all those composers, when you see trills in their music, you're going to assume the note above its note you start on, and of course you always end on the note you see. You always end on that printed note. But if the piece you're playing is written after the year 1800, you're going to assume that the trill starts on that written note, so on the lower of the two notes you're trilling on. So if you have a trill on D, the note you're going to trill on is D and E. You're actually going to start on the lower of the two notes, D, and you're going to end on that written note, which is also D. So a trill on D in the 1800s is going to sound like this. Now, keep in mind with this cutoff that nobody woke up January 1st on the year 1800 and decided that, oh, it's a turn of the century, you all have to start trilling on the lower of the two notes. There was a gradual shift that took place over time, and in fact, some composers like Beethoven are kind of split right down the middle of this cutoff. So there is some ambiguity there. You might even be able to say 1810 is a better guideline, but I just find the year 1800 is pretty safe, and most people are going to remember that number a little better. Okay, so you see a trill and it's on the note C, and you go, cool, I know it's C, and the letter name above C. Check your key signature. Okay, we don't have any sharps or flats, so it's going to be a C, and the letter name above C is D. So you're going to trill somehow on C and D, and then ask yourself, is my piece a romantic piece or later? Is it written in the 1800s or later, or is it before the year 1800? If it's written before the year 1800, you're going to trill on that upper note first, D, and then end on C. If it's written after the year 1800, you're going to trill on the C first, and still end on the C. Now at the end of the video, I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that can happen with trills and things to watch out for. But before we do, I'm going to show you how to do this symbol right here, the mordent, the other one of the two symbols I showed you at the beginning of the video. And great news, since you know how to do the trill already, figuring out the mordent is actually really, really simple. Now a mordent, like a trill, is going to wiggle back and forth between two notes. So the first thing we have to do is figure out which two notes we wiggle on, and this is really, really simple. It's basically like a trill, but upside down. So you're going to do the note that you see. Let's say we have a mordent on an A. A is the note you see, it's a printed note, but then rather than doing the letter name above A, we're going to do the letter name below A, which in this case is going to be a G. So for another example, if you see a mordent on C, we know we're going to have C, that's the printed note, but now we're going to do the note below, the letter name below C, which is B. Now I just told you that mordents are easier than trills, and the reason that is that you don't have to worry about which area you're in. Let's say we have that mordent on A. We always start on the printed note, which is the A. Then we're always going to end on the printed note, which is A. So in any area, when you see a mordent on A, you're going to start on A, do the letter name below A, and end on A. Okay, before we get to those more advanced concepts, I have a real quick kind of bring it all together in one example exercise for us. So let's say the year is 1725, and we have a trill on the letter name G. So we know we're going to have a G, and the letter name above G, which is A. And since it's the year 1725, that's definitely before 1800, we're going to assume our trill starts on the upper of the two notes. We're going to trill on G, but we're going to start on the A, which is the note above. Now, let's say we had the exact same thing, that trill on the note G, in the year 1855. Well, it's the same two notes, G and A, gets a trill, but we're going to start on the G. Like that. But now let's say we're back to the year 1725 and we have a mordent written on the G. So a mordent on that G, where you have the G, but now we're dealing with the letter name below G, which is F. Now let's fast forward again to the year 1855 and we have a mordent on G, where we're going to have a G in the letter name below G, still F, and we do the exact same thing because mordents don't care which era we're in. Mordents in the Romantic era are the same as mordents in the Classical and Baroque eras. Now, in reality, mordents hardly ever happen in the Romantic era anyway, but it's fine. Just memorize them all as the same regardless of the era. Okay, so you have made to this point in the video, so you are ready for some advanced concepts I haven't talked about until right now. One of the other really common questions with the trill is how many notes are supposed to go into the trill. Now, first of all, if you're dealing with a piece before the year 1800 and you're trilling on the upper note, that answer is going to be some kind of even number, which might seem kind of weird of me to say, but if you're starting from the upper note and you have to end on the written note, you can have 2 notes, you can have 4 notes, you can have 6 notes. But if you're dealing with a piece after the year 1800 and you're starting on the written note, you're going to have an answer like 3 notes, 5 notes, or 7 notes. But if you want to dive a little deeper than that, and you want to know whether you're supposed to do 4 or 6, or whether you're supposed to do 3 or 5, the first thing I want to say is there's a lot of ambiguity when you get to this point, but there are a few guidelines you can work with. The first 2 things I want you to check for is if you see a trill, especially a squiggly line trill, and the composer literally just made the squiggle go on for a really long time. We actually saw that earlier already once today. In Mozart K545, measure 25, that A had a trill, a TR, and a squiggly line, and that squiggly line he made last for the entire measure. That's a composer's way of saying, I want you to continue trilling. So you're going to just put a ton of notes in that measure and continue the trill on and on and on. So that's the first thing I want you to check for. Just did the composer literally take that squiggly line and just extend it for a while. The other thing I want you to look for also happens in the same measure, and that's when you have a trill suffix. Like the composer writes TR, and then at the end of that note that the TR is written on, whether it's a quarter note or it's a whole note, whatever it is, you see a couple grace notes, a couple baby notes, small notes at the end of that, time period. That's a composer's way of saying they want you to do a trill and then continue that trill on until you get to those grace notes, and you can play the grace notes at the end. So number 1, check and see if the composer has literally extended the squiggly line for a long time. And number 2, check and see if there are grace notes that are at the end of that TR note. Again, whatever the note value is, if there's grace notes at the end of it, they probably want you to extend that trill on until those grace notes happen. And then beyond that kind of context and literally how much time do you have to make it happen is going to be your best friend. So if you're playing some Mozart that has extremely fast 16th notes or 8th note runs, in the middle of one of those runs there's just a trill thrown on one of those notes, you don't have time to put 6 rotations, 6 total notes on that trill that only lasts for 1/16th note. But by the same kind of effect, if you're playing a slow adagio Mozart and you see a half note and that half note has a trill on it, you have time to get 6 or 8 or 10 notes into that trill. So what I'm getting at is it's really bad to go into a piece and just decide beforehand that, oh, all trills have to have exactly 4 notes, or it's romantic and all trills have to have exactly 5 notes. Like kind of context help you. Sign you a piece and you're just like, well, I have a long gap to fill. This is a slow movement. Nothing happens for a while here. I might as well keep the trill going to kind of extend the interest. And one last advanced concept for those of you who want to dive really deep into this topic, and that is with older composers, you actually want to add some of your own trills into the piece. I know it's going to feel so wrong for lots of you to be playing classical music, then throwing your own trills, throwing your own mordents into the pieces, but that's completely okay. When you play pieces like by Haydn, for example, it is a great idea when you're playing Haydn that if you really feel like a trill or mordent belongs somewhere, to just add it in. That was totally appropriate and considered standard for their eras, that the musician, the pianists who are playing the pieces would have the freedom to add some of their own articulation and ornamentation into the piece. Now, if you're interested in some good 1800s romantic piano music for you to test out some of these ideas on, go check out this video I did of Chopin's easiest piano pieces. See you then.